Hi, I'm Jamie Macphail. I work for Pantaenius. My role is based here in Sydney. I shouldn't say Sydney because we're currently on the Gold Coast, but in Sydney. We look after insurance on behalf of the company throughout Asia Pacific, the Indian Ocean region, and of course the depths of the Pacific, you know, from New Zealand through to north of Japan. So we look after Australian passport holders, residents, Kiwi passport holders and residents, and also expats or other people that are permanently residing in either Australia or New Zealand. And that's our core business. Our business is kind of split in two. So while we're here in Australia and we insure a lot of boats in Australia on the east coast and all the way around Australia, Victoria and WA, 25-30% of our business is insuring Australians or eligible clients for our business somewhere in the world. Maybe it's the Med, maybe it's in the Caribbean, could be in Asia, could be in Thailand, so anywhere in the world. So we get a large number of customers that are either based or transiting through all those regions. So our staff deal with changes of policies, advice, direction, answering questions right down to, you know, what's the best time to leave Panama to head to Tahiti via the Marquesas, you know, what are the wind conditions. So everybody in Pantaenius understands, you know, what sort of answers are required to those sorts of questions. So we provide not just an insurance sort of service, but we're providing a service to cruising yachties that hopefully provides them with a bit more value to, you know, to what we do. Here in Australia we focus, and worldwide we focus on floating boats. Our core business probably is powerboats and yachts from $300 or $400 through to $8 or $10 million now. We're slowly expanding that to include trailer boats and smaller boats. As we grow and we get enough staff, you know, we've then got the manpower, people power, if you like, to better service, you know, smaller value items, and so we're expanding, you know, our target market, if you like. But our core business very much is, you know, is production yachts and cruisers at $600-800 to maybe $1 million. When the pandemic hit, of course, everybody was thinking, you know, we're going to run into a mini world recession like we did in 2008. So I think everybody was very subdued. Manufacturers certainly backed off construction. It wasn't long before they had to back off construction because, you know, they either had to protect their staff, their labour from COVID, or they had COVID so they didn't have staff. So, you know, that was a catch-22 for the manufacturers. But the dealers initially also backed off. They didn't have a lot of orders. But within a 2 or 3 month period, the whole perception seemed to change, certainly within the boating market, and I think the broader market was the same. And a lot of people started ordering new boats, new caravans, you know, we call them the grey nomad market, who probably is our core market, you know, when it comes to age sort of demographic. You know, it's people in their 50s and 60s, either retired or semi-retired, or with income streams and businesses that they can manage remotely. And a lot of those people then decided, well, I can't go to work, I can work remotely, I can work from a holiday house, or I can work from a boat, and a lot of them chose to buy boats. So that started what we see today as a really significant, you know, uplift in boat orders, in the demand for manufacturing to produce the product, and it's also led to significant price increases. Along with that, we've seen an equivalent change in ownership of second-hand boats, because when you order a new boat, you take delivery, then you're dumping your old boat back on the market. But the supply of products being the biggest issue. So at the moment, we're still seeing supply being probably quite a bit behind where demand is. And that's why we see the order books for most of the major manufacturers out to 24 or even 25. So that's resulted in an inflationary, you know, movement in the boating market, notwithstanding what else is happening in the economy. Of course, the supply chains are slow because manufacturers are being closed. The supply chains are slow because shipping's been disastrous because supply is slow, and we've got this huge bottleneck in China. The manufacturers can't get components. only now we're seeing most of the manufacturers in the world revving back up to 100% capacity. Most of them being closed for months on end, some of them have only been working 3 or 4 days a week. I just learnt today that Palm Beach Grand Banks actually were closed for 4 solid months in Malaysia last year because of the pandemic, because there was a full lockdown of all their staff, so they couldn't operate. So, that's put pressure on supply. It's the demand's only got higher, so that's resulted in increasing prices. Increasing prices, of course, with products has resulted in increasing prices in insurance. So the cost of insurance has gone up. The byproduct of that, to some extent, is we've seen a lot of existing owners upgrade, buy new boats, invest. But we've seen a lot of people come to boating that have never been in boating before. That's a bit of an issue for an insurer, because obviously when we underwrite a boat, we underwrite, yes, the boat, the age, the condition, the service, the maintenance, but one major factor, of course, in underwriting somebody is, have you got any experience? Are you likely to hit the dock every time you bring it home? Are you going to hit the Porsche in the berth next door for all intensive purposes? Not a Porsche, but maybe it's a Riva or something, So they're factors that we have to take into account. I mean, the other thing that happened through the pandemic, obviously people couldn't fly. So Australians and Kiwis who had, that 25-30% of our book who keep their boats overseas or who were overseas, either had to come home or they isolated on their boats in the Caribbean, in the Med, in Turkey, somewhere, and as a result, there was a bit of pressure on us to act. So we provided a couple of solutions for the pandemic, for short-term reductions in premiums, because people weren't able to move their boats. So they were living on their boats in marinas. Some people were living on the hard stand. And of course, as the risk, profile reduces, then we were able to reduce the premium. We did that for maybe 25% of our book. So that created a lot more work, because as you do that, every time you do that, someone's got to touch that policy. So, our labour force had to step in and work, a lot of overtime just to keep up with the requests from all these people that were stuck in marinas in Greece, in Croatia, in Italy, and also in places like Turkey, even Tunisia. We had 15 or 18 people living on their boats for more than 6 months, locked up in a marina in Tunisia. So, it's challenging, but that's the sort of service you've got to provide. So, the Russian-Ukraine war, I know that Russia doesn't like to call it a war, it's some sort of political skirmish that's going on in Ukraine, but clearly it's a war. That affects the insurers and the underwriters in a range of different ways. Most insurance policies traditionally have clauses which exclude cover in a war environment, in a war-torn environment, and the location where that war is, or a skirmish, traditionally over the years has been advised in the International Insurance Advisory Council and across a bunch of websites, so that most owners of yachts that cruise the world have always been aware that you can't, certainly in the last 15 years, you can't go to Somalia. The Red Sea is a no-go zone. As far as they're concerned, that's a war-torn area. And also in the Sulu Sea, in the southern Philippines, that's an area which has been a no-go zone, because of kidnappings and terror-style activities. And customers who cruise on powerboats and yachts know that, because the advisory information's there, so you don't provide cover. And the clauses provide the mechanism to exclude cover in those regions. The same clauses, together with what we now see as the sanctions that have been, instigated by the West, effectively, NATO, USA, and a whole range of other countries have adopted sanctions. That's a really broad scenario, obviously, but from the insurance industry perspective, we've probably helped significantly to identify, assets that are owned by sanctioned individuals, Russian individuals or associates, because by requesting, who the beneficial owner is, and basically putting them in a position where if they don't provide that information, under law, we're no longer able to insure their asset. We've received all this information and by default effectively identified a whole range of owners that are beneficial owners, and they're Russians. And that's happened mainly through Europe, of course, but we've seen a few here in Australia, and certainly in the Asia Pacific, there's a couple of well-documented examples of Russian assets that have ended up, being locked up in, places like Fiji, for example. So the insurance industry is under a lot of pressure to ensure that they comply with the sanctions. If they don't, of course, all the insurance companies in the world are licensed to operate in different jurisdictions. The last thing they want is the US government to say, hey, you guys have been breaching the sanctions, you haven't done what you're meant to do, these boats are still insured by you, the owner's Russian beneficial, and of course the US government's all they're going to do is cancel their license to operate. You can just imagine, Allianz or a significant insurance company getting told by the US government you're no longer welcome to operate in America. So the insurance companies are going to jump through hoops to ensure they comply with the sanctions, and so should they. Well, the other benefits of this, of course, are the governments that haven't been getting taxed for assets that technically they should, or identifying assets that are owned by people that they didn't know own the asset. So, if you're running a business in Australia and it turns out you're the beneficial owner of a $45 million super yacht, but the last tax return you put in showed an income of 800 grand, well, there's a fair chance the tax man's going to be pretty happy to receive that information, on something that's been turned up in a sanctions search. So, it appears that everybody wins other than the Russians. I don't think anybody really knows where the market's going. My personal perspective is I think we're going to see a continued increase in price. Obviously new boats, if you buy Riviera today, they ask you to put a deposit of 25 grand down. They can't really tell you when the boat's going into construction, but they might say, look, we're going to deliver the boat in 25. When the boat goes into construction, they ask for another 25%, and it's only then that you actually know what your boat's going to cost. Because to be fair to Riviera, they don't know what the materials are going to be costing them in 2 years' time. So if the raw material, product through the supply chain goes up 25%, just like builders and everybody else in the marketplace, they can't lock in a price today. So it's definitely we're going to see increases in prices. Second-hand boats are going to continue to increase in value. That old adage that, your yacht or your cruiser is a deep, dark hole in the ocean you keep throwing $100 bills into. Well, the good news is if you keep doing that today, chances are you're going to get it all back because the price is going to go up when you go to sell it in 2 years' time. So that's a positive for the industry. And maybe the one thing that the COVID's done, the pandemic's done, is it possibly has brought a lot more people into the boating industry who otherwise probably wouldn't have come into it, because these are people that travel overseas every year. Airports are closed, no flying. In Australia, you couldn't fly. It was illegal for an Australian to leave the country. So they still want to go on holiday. So they, as I said earlier, they bought holiday houses, they bought boats, they bought caravans. But a lot of those people who otherwise wouldn't have bought boats have probably discovered they like boating, and that's increased, our boating population. So I think that's been a good thing for our industry, at least anyway.